Hello, welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. Well, today we have a very special guest. We have the president of the National Right to Life Committee, the oldest pro-life organization in America. And it has, it's in all 50 states, and it has over 3,000 chapters, of which I was the chairman of one of those chapters here in Boston for 5 years, the West Roxbury chapter. Well, welcome, Carol Tobias.
Thank you. It's great to be on.
Carol, may I ask what was your journey? How did you get involved with the pro-life movement?
I actually grew up with it. My parents were very active in the state Right to Life group in North Dakota. So I was, growing up, and they were going off to meetings, and I knew what they were doing and working on. Then as I got older, it just kind of became natural for me when I was looking for something to do to then get involved in the local chapter. And then I ended up becoming executive director of our state group, and then I moved to Washington, became political director for National Right to Life, and I'm now president. So it was just kind of an ongoing, one step after another. And it all started just because I went to one chapter meeting when I was, a youngster.
Wow. Well, that's terrific. Well, today we brought you on because there's a significant new piece of legislation that was passed in the state of Kansas. Could you tell us a little bit about that? What was the genesis of this idea? Did it happen from national, or was it a state thing? How did it all come about?
Well, the bill that you are referring to has been called the Unborn Child Protection from Dismemberment Abortion Act. And that is the brainchild of our state legislative director, Mary Spalding Balch. She is looking for ways to influence legislation, to pass legislation that will, one, save babies, but two, focus the public attention on that unborn child and bring the baby back into the debate, because this country is always talking about women's rights and whether or not abortion should be allowed. But we want to make sure that the public remembers that for every abortion there is a tiny little baby, sometimes not so tiny depending on the stage of pregnancy. So Mary thought, let's start talking about how babies are killed in this country by pulling apart arms and legs while they are still inside the uterus. So she came up with this legislation, approached some of our state affiliates and asked if they would be willing to try it first time out. Kansas immediately jumped on it and said yes, they wanted to do it. They were quickly followed by Oklahoma. So both states have now passed bills. The governors have signed the legislation, so it will soon become law, to say that unborn babies in those states, Kansas and Oklahoma, cannot be killed by dismemberment abortion.
Now they call it a dilation and evacuation dismemberment abortion. Is there another type of abortion that's not dismemberment?
There are some other procedures. One, they would maybe even inject a chemical into the baby's heart so the baby dies, and then they can deliver the baby whole. This is worded in such a way that you cannot kill the child by dismemberment, by pulling off the arms and the legs. If the abortionist would kill the child and then this was the best or only way to get that child out of the uterus, it could still happen. But the most common second trimester abortion procedure has the abortionist pulling the arms and legs off of the baby while that baby is still alive. So the Kansas and Oklahoma now no longer allows this procedure in their states.
Now, most abortions occur, I think, between the 9th or 10th week and the 12th week, roughly. Would this cover that, or not, or no? I'm it's kind of on the cusp, I would say, isn't it?
This is a procedure that is used most commonly in the second trimester, somewhere in the 14 to 20 or maybe even 24 week stage of development. So most abortions are performed in the first 3 months of pregnancy. Almost 90% are done in those first 3 months. So this procedure will affect those mostly in the second trimester.
Now, in Wichita, Kansas, I was reading that the owner, Julie Burkhart of the Wichita Abortion Clinic, she was fighting it. And what kind of how is she fighting something that talks about a dismemberment abortion ban? What argumentation would she use?
Well, they were using everything from, this should be a woman's right, so the decision between a woman and her doctor, the same arguments that we have been hearing for many years, to talking about how, this is the safest abortion procedure, so you're taking that away from women. What they weren't willing to talk about was how the baby actually dies in the procedure.
Mm-hmm. And that's by pulling leg and arms off, and then how do they get the skull out of the uterus?
Well, the abortionist will have, a clamp that they will, it's like a forceps, almost like a pliers, a clamp, that they will insert into the uterus. They grab parts of the baby, maybe an arm or a leg, and they can't really see in there. They're not sure where the baby is positioned. So they just reach in there until they can feel something, and they grab something, they clamp on, and pull it out. So it might be a leg, it might be part of the torso. At some point in the development of the child, depending on how old the baby is, the skull maybe is hardened bone by the time that this abortion is taking place. So the skull has to be crushed and then can be removed with that clamp.
I see. Now, are there other states that you're hopeful that this legislation will get a good reception in the near term?
This year, I know there are 2 other states that have introduced it, Missouri and South Carolina. But we don't know if they're going to be able to pass it. Mary's goal for the first year actually was, just to focus on a couple of states to see what arguments might come out against it. Are there some, maybe legislative fixes that should be made before other states try it? So she wanted a couple of states that would be kind of the testing ground. And things went so well in Kansas and Oklahoma that we certainly expect more states, if not this year, then next year and in 2017, to start picking this up and passing the bill.
Mm-hmm. I see. We have certainly had success with the Pain-Capable Unborn Protection Act, I believe. How far along, how many states have adopted that now?
11 states have passed that bill, so babies that have reached the stage where they can develop or feel pain, which is about 20 weeks after fertilization, those babies in those states cannot be killed by abortion by any means. They are protected.
Well, that's terrific. Well, now, some of the questions regarding this Dismemberment Abortion Act, aren't dismemberment abortions rare?
They actually aren't. Unfortunately, they aren't. This country kills about 1.05 million unborn babies every year. About 10% of them are performed during a pregnancy that has reached past the first 3 months. So the body of victims for late-term, second, third trimester abortions would be about 100,000. Now, we know that the dismemberment abortion procedure is the most common among those 100,000 babies in the second, third trimester, but we don't know for sure how many of them, just because different states have different ways of reporting. They don't specify the abortion procedure that is used, or they have different timelines of how old the baby was. So we really don't know for sure how many, but it's possibly up to 100,000 that could be killed by this procedure.
And are dismemberment abortions, are they used to kill relatively undeveloped children, aren't they?
No. By the time this dismemberment abortion procedure is used, The child has a full body with brain waves, legs, arms, eyelids, fingerprints, the organs, the kidney, the liver, the brains, all that is in place. They have teeth, they have fingernails. The child can frown, kick, swim. This is a fully formed human being, a fully formed baby that is being torn apart limb from limb when that child is still alive.
Mm-hmm. I know Bernard Nathanson became a convert back 30 years or so ago when he saw one of the first ultrasounds, a rather grainy image, but he saw the baby's mouth opening and reacting to the abortion like they were feeling pain. And it's...
And he came up with that wonderful video that he just called the silent scream because he could see that baby's mouth opening.
Mm. Now, isn't this just a routine procedure, the dismemberment abortion?
No, this is one of the most common form of abortion for second trimester abortions. And why we think it could actually be successful if this would go up to the Supreme Court is that when they ruled in the partial birth abortion decision saying that partial birth abortions could be banned in this country, they actually described D&E or dilation and evacuation abortion, and they got specific and described the dismemberment procedure. And we really think, based on the partial birth abortion decision, that they would also uphold a ban on dismemberment abortions.
Now, I know the other side often tries to change the names of things. For instance, when does life begin? Which, we've had to say, well, it begins really at fertilization, not necessarily how they like to say it begins at implantation. Do you think the other side will start to fight this tendency if you have this success with a word such as dismemberment? That certainly would color people's opinions in the pro-life favor. Is the other side coming up with terminology that would try to obfuscate that?
I haven't seen anything that they will be successful with. They don't know how to really combat this other than to talk about, abortion, women's rights, trying to convince people that this is just a blob of cells, a mass of tissue. They don't want to acknowledge that we're talking about a fully formed baby whose arms and legs are being torn off. This is also, I think they're going to have to fight this because it is the most common procedure used for the second trimester abortion. They make a lot of money off of this procedure because as the pregnancy gets farther along, the cost of the abortion increases. So they're not going to want to see this kind of money taken out of their pocket because, babies are no longer allowed to be killed in this manner.
Mm-hmm. And does dismemberment abortion have wide support in the medical community?
No, it really doesn't. When people think of, hearing, when they think about babies being torn apart, limb from limb, the arms and legs being pulled off the torso, the head being crushed, that really questions, who would do that kind of thing. And, most abortionists are doctors. The medical community doesn't want anything to do with this. They don't like having any kind of limits placed on what they can do, but they don't want to be associated with this because it's violent and dehumanizing.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, are dismemberment abortions ever necessary to preserve the life of the health of the mother?
No. This type of procedure can often take, up to 36 hours, just because, they have to dilate the cervix, and that alone can take some time. So if the woman really does have some serious physical or life-threatening problems, this isn't the kind of procedure that you're going to use. What they like, the abortion industry likes this procedure because it's faster and even cheaper for them than some of the other methods.
Mm-hmm. And now, do you feel that this law I know Mary Balch, I believe she's an attorney. I know her husband is. Do you think that this will be struck down in the courts, just another, say, doomed attempt to reverse Roe versus Wade?
We don't think it will. In the partial birth abortion decision, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the Supreme Court actually addressed dismemberment abortions. Justice Kennedy wrote the decision in the partial birth abortion decision, and this is what he wrote about this procedure that we're talking about today. The fetus, in many cases, dies just as a human adult or child would. It bleeds to death as it is torn limb from limb. The fetus can be alive at the beginning of the dismemberment process and can survive for a time while its limbs are being torn off. He said that this is laden with the power to devalue human life. So I think the court several years ago was already recognizing the horror and the violence that is being perpetrated on these unborn children. So we're very confident that we actually would have the votes on the Supreme Court to uphold this.
And how long would it take for a activity like the court system to process on the various levels so that it percolates up to the Supreme Court and is hopefully heard by the Supreme Court? Because I think only 3% of all cases that go up there are heard. How long might that take? Any ballpark idea?
Oh, it can take several years. It has to go to a district court, and then if the district court rules something, it would go to the appellate court. The appellate court can make a decision, or they can just say, we're going to send this back to the district court because we think you should change this part of your ruling. So then it goes back to the district judge, and then, whichever side wins or loses, it can be appealed back to the appellate court, and then it can go to the Supreme Court, and all that can actually take several years.
Mm-hmm.
To get into a little more detail on the partial birth abortion decision, Gonzalez v. Carhart, the Supreme Court did say that federal law protecting unborn children from partial birth abortion can be based, and they also included states, an interest in protecting the integrity and ethics of the medical profession. It can be based on the premise that the state, from the inception of the pregnancy, maintains its own regulatory interest in protecting the life of the fetus that may become a child, where it has a rational basis to act and it does not impose an undue burden. The state may use its regulatory power to bar certain procedures and substitute others, all in furtherance of its legitimate interests in regulating the medical profession in order to promote respect for life, including the life of the unborn. So we think the Unborn Child Protection from Dismemberment Abortion Act would actually fit the standards that the Supreme Court laid out, that the state does have a compelling interest in protecting innocent life, and where they can regulate one certain procedure if they want to. So I think there were just so many instances or things that the court wrote that would give us some encouragement that this is a procedure that they actually would say the states have the authority to regulate.
Well, now, for instance, what about unborn children with fetal anomalies? With all of the, they're doing all sorts of testing now, prenatal testing, and scaring young couples that their child may have this disease or this abnormally. Would this circumvent the whole idea of dismemberment abortions, or would it buoy the dismemberment abortion crowd? What do you think about that?
One of the things that is so very discouraging is that when parents do some testing and their doctor will tell them, your child may have this disability or this illness, this disease, they are then encouraged to get an abortion. A lot of that testing is done in, maybe the second or third trimester. So when, parents are told that they may have a child with a disability and they're looking for an abortion instead of taking care of that child, this is the kind of procedure that would be used. So our opponents are probably going to start arguing, look, if you've got a disabled child, and you can't get an abortion, you're going to want to do anything you can to get rid of that problem. So this actually could help to prevent the killing of children because of a disability. What we need to do as a society, and there are certainly places already available that would provide hospice for babies that are born. Some in the medical profession would say incompatible with life. Some babies that may be considered born dying, but you help them. You make the death of the child, if that is going to occur, as loving and compassionate and caring as possible. You don't use abortion to get rid of that problem. So we've got, there are some states that are trying to pull together information on hospice care for children who are born with serious problems. And we need to be working on that as a compassionate solution, not just killing a baby because he or she may have a disability.
Mm-hmm. And now, what do you see on the forefront of other activities? This certainly is quite a very interesting development that can be carried out over the next few years. What are some of your other objectives that you'd like to achieve during the next year or two or three?
Well, I think what we are seeing is a drop in abortion providers. Some of the older abortionists are retiring, and they are not being replaced by younger abortionists, which is very good, very encouraging. But what we have seen is that Planned Parenthood is trying to set up computerized facilities so they can have someone, an abortionist, sitting in his office talking to a woman in another city over the computer. They're Skyping with each other. And he can push a button on his computer that will open a drawer in the room where she is sitting, and it will be, in that drawer will be the chemical cocktail that will kill her unborn child. We call that a chemical abortion or a chemical cocktail abortion. The abortion industry just calls them medical abortions. It's basically a prescription. The woman takes one pill, and that will be the pill that will kill her unborn child. The abortionist will tell her to go home and take the second pill, 2 or 3 days later, and that's the pill that will cause cramping so that the dead child is expelled from the uterus. That we've got a solution there where several states, I think it's 17 states now, have passed a law that would say if you're going to do an abortion, you have to be in the same room as the woman. You have to do a physical exam so that you know whether or not this is an ectopic pregnancy, because taking these pills is not going to kill that child in the fallopian tube, so then the mother could actually die. This is a severe problem for infection and bleeding, hemorrhaging. So we've got states that are now saying, they're banning what we call webcam abortions. So an abortionist can't prescribe a pill to someone sitting in another city or in another state. And I think that's something that's going to be very necessary as the number of abortionists decreases, but it's going to be easy to prescribe a pill over the Internet. Mm-hmm. So that's actually one that I think is very serious and that we really need to focus on and concentrate on.
I see. Wow, that's quite something. I hope
it's a lot to consider because most people have a hard time believing that it's happening, but it really is.
Right. It's not real medicine. Medicine by webcam, and you're talking about putting serious chemicals into your body and killing someone. So and I know many women also have bled to death doing this or haven't followed the protocol exactly, and bad things happen. So that's. It's certainly a worthy pursuit. Well, Carol, our time has come to an end, unfortunately, because there's many other topics that we could discuss today. But I'm pleased that we talked about this one because it is an exciting development from the pro-life perspective that could limit more and more abortions, particularly the most common one in the second trimester, dismemberment abortions.
When we had the partial birth abortion ban debate in this country, a lot of people woke up because they didn't know abortions were being performed at that stage of pregnancy, and they didn't know that we were talking about fully formed babies. There was a huge sea change in opinion in this country. We are hoping to see even more of that with this kind of dismemberment discussion of how babies are killed in this country.
Well, that's terrific. Well, hopefully that's the case, and we can change hearts and minds here. And that's what we try to do at Life Matters TV. Well, thanks again, Carol, for being our guest today. And folks, we hope you found today's show to be unique, informative, content-rich, truthful, and thought-provoking. Thanks for watching. I'm Brendan O'Connell, your friend for life.